We argued in the last talk of this series on truth and power that we have a limitation of rationality. There are limits on our ability to reason. Today we are going to look at other limitations that we have, the limits that we have to be able to make sound judgment. Hello and peace to all of you. I am Louay Safi, and this is a new episode of the series Truth and Power. We'll talk about the limits of our ability to judge, to make sound judgment. And I will like to argue that this is mainly has to do with the fact that we have biases. We have both unconscious and conscious biases. Let me begin by examining what do I mean that we have unconscious biases. Well, those biases have to do with the three factors or elements that are internal to our ability to think about events and individuals around us. Number one, the element of positioning, that we are positioned in a specific time and place. We are influenced by the culture we grow up in, by the fact that we have a limited time to live, and that allow us only to have limited rationality. So our positioning, the way the society in which we live, we inherit many of the prejudices and biases built into that society, and often we don't question that. Of course, few of us who try to look critically at some of the affirmation and some of the propositions that we carry with us can help us see through our own biases. So we have positioning, we have centeredness, we have self-centered, we look at the world from our own interests and our own values, and we give priority to those values and interests. And so that gives us another limitation on our ability to look around us. And then number three, we have another limitation that have to do with the fact that we are sentimental human beings. Humans are sentimentals. We have emotions, and so we are attracted to certain people and feel repulsed towards certain people. Those who look like us, who behave like us, who share with us our values and our space, those who are members of our family, our community, we tend to be more attached to them, and there are certain sentimental elements that will make us not very able to see through the concerns of those who are far away from us. So we give priority to those who are near, and we seem to care less about those who are far away, unless we have developed certain disciplines. I'll come back to talk about this. So these are unconscious biases that we are part of our own experience. These biases, of course, can be overcome, and I'll talk about that a bit. But let me first let me give an example of those kind of biases, these unconscious biases. I'll use a very funny story of Marco Polo, the well-known Italian traveler, who went all over the world to discover and to explore different cultures and different societies. One of those societies he visited was a sultanate in Central Africa, and he was accorded a meeting with the Sultan, and he wanted to entertain the Sultan, and he told him about what they experience in Venice, North of Italy. He told him that in winter, people can walk um, on the water of the lake, nearby lake. And so he sort of wanted to entertain him and bring him something that he is not familiar with. But in fact, that was a sort of anger to the Sultan. He thought that his guest is trying to fool him and make fun of him because in his mind, nobody could walk over any lake, whether in winter or in summer. Um, he never experienced this phenomenon of the lake freezing in winter. And so he did not really believe that visitor, and so he ordered him to be thrown out of his court. Now, this is have to do with the biases, with the experience, the limitation of the experience of that sultan, and of course, of his lack of trust. Definitely, this is a stranger. He doesn't trust him, and he told him about things in his mind did not make any sense. So he thought this person is not worthy of his company. Um, that leads me to talk about conscious bias. And I'm talking here about prejudice. Prejudice, this feeling of superiority toward and looking at other communities or individuals as inferior. Um, this kind of prejudice really is born out of arrogance. Of, as I said, some people feel that they are superior. Some cultures feel that they are superior. Some culture and some societies feel that other societies have to be subordinated to them. They cannot be treated as their equal. That's something like happen in many places, either because of some of the leadership of a particular community, or because of the beliefs and values of the community. One of those examples, let me give some examples, and perhaps one informative example is what happened to the city of the city in central Syria called Palmyra. Palmyra, or in Arabic Tadmur, was an Aramaic city in the center of the Syrian desert. And it wanted to have some sort of an autonomy, not to be completely subjugated to the direct Roman rule, but wanted to maintain some autonomy. But that angered the Romans. And what they did, they sent an army, and they crossed the desert and reached that city. And then they destroyed it completely. They razed it. They razed all the buildings to the ground, massacred its population, and took a lot of the valuable stuff that was there, but cared less about the people and completely destroyed the city. Now, this is really can happen only when you feel like you are completely superior, and those who challenge you have not only no right, but they have committed some outrageous deed. And so that was quite a brutal response on the part of Romans, and Romans tended to have that response whenever somebody challenged them from outside their ethnic background. So if you are not non-Roman, then you will really have to deal with the wrath of Rome whenever you crossed, the authority of the Roman Empire. And that's, as I said, this is really a prejudice. Racism is another form, of course. Racism could be very harmful to people who are subject to a racist attitude by a culture or a community that they feel themselves that are much more superior than other human beings, so they can treat them not according with the rules of fairness and equality expected from people who are treating other human beings. So racism is prejudice, and any type of beliefs or culture that allow itself to look at others as lesser people. Of course, Romans saw everybody who was not Roman, they saw them as barbarian. The Greeks have the same attitude. And of course, other cultures in the ancient times dealt with the strangers, sometimes with wrath and with destruction. That has to do definitely with this sense of superiority. Finally, before I conclude this brief introduction to the question of bias and the limitations on judgment, I would like to say a few words about how to deal with the question of bias. What is the best way to control bias, at least to reduce its effect, because the effects of bias is quite disastrous. It tends to pit people against each other and create the conditions for aggression and for conflicts, and eventually the conditions for war. So how do we really control that human bias, which is, as I tried to show, even when it's not intended, it's unconscious because of our human limitation. We are positioned somewhere in society. We have certain cultures, certain biases that are part of our upbringing as well as part of our innate nature, because we are self-centered individuals and we can overcome our ego through a lot of discipline. And that's probably the key. The key, number one, is through the education system. Education must pay attention and inform people about their psychology and their limitation as human beings and how to overcome those limitations, because as a human race, as a human society, historically, we overcome our weaknesses by becoming more educated and more learning and exploring our own psyche as well as our social conditions. So that's one important way, public education. But then we have to really develop this moral discipline. Culture and society must pay attention to moral discipline, particularly the commitment to the equal dignity of people. Equal dignity of people was the gift of monotheism to the world. Before monotheism, every community had their own gods, and it was difficult to understand people like equal and belonging to the same family, to the same origin. It was the monotheistic narrative that told us that we are all part of one family. We belong to two parents, to two individuals who are at the peak of or at the beginning of our evolution as a human society. So those values, and of course, it's in monotheism that this equal dignity has been emphasized over and over again. Of course, human beings try to play around it and find excuses to recreate this notion of masters and slave, or of civilized people as opposed to barbarian. But we need really to make sure that this principle of equal dignity that has become really acceptable throughout society, is not only among monotheistic today that this principle is acceptable, but there are other people with different religious background who have come closely and slowly but surely toward that awareness. That has to be re-emphasized again. Maybe education, families, public media. Media is very important here, but perhaps one of the most important factors to overcome bias, particularly this hatred and arrogance that one community shows toward the other, or one ethnic community shows toward the other, or one race shows toward the other. An important and maybe very vital factor to overcome that is leadership. It is through this model of leadership, through leaders who really embrace the principle of equal dignity, that humanity could again try to overcome all the obstacles. I'm not suggesting that he can overcome them completely, because even when they are overcome at one particular in a particular generation, they tend to come back um, because of the competition and because of the greed of leaders who want to use this principle of divide and conquer in order to control their own people and control the lives of other communities. So with this, I would like to thank you for staying with me, and I hope to see you again in our next talk. Have a good time.